Well, hello students. Now that you've looked at a few of the YouTube videos that I put up there on decision making and programmed and non-programmed decisions, I want to talk to you now about the 6 steps in the rational decision making process. And you can follow along with the PowerPoints as I go through the steps. This is very much like, as I mentioned earlier, the critical decision process. And the first step is to identify the problem or opportunity. And that would be to clearly state the problem that is to be solved. Many times we look at a lot of different problems and we don't really focus in on what the issue is. We get bogged down by emotional fog and we don't factually state what the problem actually is about. So you want to be sure that you are on point as far as what the problem actually is without beating around the bush. The second thing is to identify the criteria of the decision. That would mean to determine what outcomes are being sought and identify different measures that will determine success. So what we're talking about here is once you've identified the problem, just like when you pick out a strategic plan, what are all of the different steps that you take to solve the problem? Think of all the different criteria that you could use. Throw them all out there. You don't have to prioritize them as well, but put out there what you think you need to do. The next step in the process is to identify alternatives. And now you can start to prioritize. Pick all the things that you threw out there and prioritize according to how each one of those will best solve the problem. So essentially what you're doing is you're identifying alternative courses of action. Now, once you come up with, say you brainstorm with 7 or 8 different alternatives and you narrow them down to 4 or 5 by priority, you want to allocate the weights that you're going to put on each one of those priorities by determining how well those priorities fit the criteria for decision making. So out of those weights, out of those priorities that you give to each one of those alternatives, you want to evaluate them as best you can on what could by themselves serve as a very useful tool in getting through the problem. Maybe you've gone from 8 to 4 alternatives and then you narrow them down to 2 or 3. Then out of those 2 or 3, maybe select the best 2 among all of the choices that you've identified. This would be considered the 6 steps in the rational decision-making process. You would also want to explain how problem framing decisions, making deviates from rational decision making. So What is problem framing? Problem framing explains that the way a situation is framed or presented will impact the choices made by decision makers. So, okay, you've selected all the best alternatives to solve the problem. Now you start to problem frame, and you're going to say, how will that impact the results of my decision? How will everyone take that? Will they all feel the same way about my ways to solve the problem? And a lot of times you will find that problem framing shows one of the ways that decision makers sometimes deviate from rational behavior. They seem unable to accurately and consistently calculate probabilities because they are preoccupied with how a problem is framed. When faced with a choice, individuals tend to choose problems framed as positive or gains over choices framed as negative or losses. And what does this all mean? What this all means is sometimes we don't like to face the facts of how painstaking it might be to solving a problem. We try to flower it up a little bit because we don't think that everyone is going to buy into it. And that's wrong. Because what that does is that separates reality from perception. And the further you are away from those two, the more likely you're going to develop problems down the road. You have to frame a problem based on its context, based on its ability to cause harm in the organization. How quickly and efficiently we handle it is based on not framing the problem to a certain demographic, but facing the problem and letting everyone know the steps that need to be taken to solve it correctly. So it isn't a win or lose situation. It isn't a series of gains or losses. It's a series of looking at things positively and rationally so that we can have a favorable outcome in the end result. Okay? So essentially, that is what I'm going to cover today in our lecture. I'm going to also put another YouTube video up for you on the 6 steps regarding the rational decision-making process. Tomorrow, we move into DQ 1 and 2. Now remember, you answer me with a substantive paragraph, 2 or 3 sentences, and then you answer a peer in your class. Make sure that you are timely in your answers. Watch the due dates, because after the due date, okay, those DQs will disappear. So each DQ is worth 2.5 points, and it's 5 points for each week of your grade. So you want to pay attention to that. And I will also reiterate by telling you that what you do here also counts for your class participation. All those are factored in the grade. Thank you.